finally good to go. We're going to just have to go with it. I'd like to introduce our club vice president, Grace Farrar. Barry. Grace Barry.
Okay, well, I don't know if they can hear us on the microphone, but I will just give a few words introducing our speaker. Some of you may remember her from the last time she presented to the club a couple years ago, and tonight we're excited to welcome back Karen Rosenthal, an international award-winning photographer. Here are just a few highlights from her bio, which you can find in full on the club website. Her abstract photos of nudes in nature reside in 17 museum collections, including Boston's MFA, the Brooklyn Museum, and the Yale University Art Gallery. Her photograph in the exhibit First Out, Optical Confusion and Modern Photography at YUAG was selected to represent the show of 100 images by famous 20th century photographers and was featured in the New York Times Review. And as a resident artist scholar at Brandeis University's Women's Studies Research Center, she initiated and oversaw an exhibition of photographs by Vivian Mayer in 2013. A book entitled Karen Rosenthal, 20 Years of Photographs, was published in conjunction with a retrospective of her Nudes in Water series at the Danforth Museum in 2000. Tonight, we're so fortunate to hear from her as she shares and discusses a new series of work in this talk entitled Faces Beyond Traditional Portraiture. And we're especially grateful to have her as she graciously is joining us tonight from the East Coast. So with the hour already being late on her side, without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Karen Rosenthal.
Thank you so much, Grace. Nice to see what you look like, and nice to be back with this group again after being with you 2 years ago. I wish I could be there in person, but this will have to do. You've had some technical difficulties. I made a mistake and thought that I was going to be able to use presenter view, which is a way of using PowerPoint in a lecture hall where you can read your notes and the pictures are on the screen. But then I realized just an hour before this began that I can't do that. But I think I know it pretty well, and I printed out a few notes, so bear with me. I can check my notes on occasion and take you through my journey here. I did speak a couple of years ago about my nudes in nature, but doing portraiture it goes back even further in my life. It's been part of my journey within the human landscape, all of it. The portrait, oh, I'm sorry, I have to share my screen. So we are rusty. I am here. Let me get to the, okay. Host disabled, it says the host disabled participant screen sharing. So you might have to change that. Share screen. No, I can't.
Yeah, but this is not on this is on this one. If you just yes. How's that?
We'll find out. You think it's enabled? Okay, yeah. Good job. Okay,
all right.
Oops, you are screen sharing, yes, but I can't get, why is this in the way here? Let's see if I can move this. Yeah, good. Okay. So, what I'm talking about tonight is some of the traditional portraiture that I've done over the years, but I've also been pushing into a new version of portraiture, and it really comes from what I've learned about using light and reflections in doing my nudes. It's grown out of that. So I'll talk about my ideas about portraiture and show you some of the images I've done that go way back, and some of them more recent. And And then I'll go even a little beyond what is portraiture into faces. And I call it faces because while some of these are portraits, some of them are do other things with people's faces. They tell stories. And it's all new material I've been working on since really 2019. It's growing slowly, going in different directions, and it's a lot of the way that the Nudes and Water began too. I'm trying to find my voice with this, but I like the generative nature of the material. And so I'm very interested in your feedback. I would love to know how they you know, come across to you and which aspects you respond to and which you don't. Oops. So I go way back with the camera. At the age of 6, I got my first camera, took it to school, took a picture of my best friend, the first grade teacher and the elementary school principal. You know, while it's not really a portrait, it does prioritize people. And I have been prioritizing people in my work all my life. I photographed a lot of friends early on, and I continue to, but I did a lot of them in the 70s and 80s. And then I would also do some portraits for hire. This was a singer who needed a PR photo. And I wrote about this work back then. I wrote back in the 70s that portraits can work in 2 directions. They can improve the social mask, or they can strip it away to find the human, the vulnerable, or the universal. Commercial portraits generally attempt the former, while portraits of artistic value to me succeed in the latter. A portrait must reveal other levels of life than mere appearance to have broad and lasting significance. And, you know, while I find this a lovely image and it certainly worked for her purposes, you don't know that much about who she really is, except a beautiful young woman photographed in a lovely light. This picture, on the other hand, is a portrait done by Edward Steichen of J.P. Morgan a long time ago. And it's a very revealing portrait and one of my favorites of all time. It just never dies on me. He took 2 pictures of J.P. Morgan and had somebody sitting in the chair to get the light right. But he had Morgan adjust his pose a little bit, and Morgan grasped the chair arm. He was not at all happy about this suggestion of Steichen's, and this ferocity lit up in his eyes. And there you see the, you know, strength of his grasp of the armchair, the chair arm. And then there's a collaboration between the artist and the light that's just sheer luck, where the chair's arm turns into a dagger, and it goes perfectly with the pose. And so it's an amazing portrait. I had an opportunity to do some revealing portraits of my own. I didn't start out to do a series of portraits, and I didn't even take this picture for a year after I started working with developmentally disabled men in a institution. A friend of mine from art school was a psychologist part-time there, and she wanted me to start a tutoring program. And so I went to the building and I met this person who I was going to be tutoring, and he had such a strong, open face. It was startling. And then, you know, towards the end of the first year, I had some film left in my camera back in the days of film, and I wanted to finish off, you know, the last few frames. So I took it to work and took this picture, and there were 7 frames, I think, and they were all absolutely startling. And so I started taking my camera more frequently. This is another person, not one I tutored. It was happened to be a building full of these older men who had been at the institution a long time. And they had never been out in society. They'd always been, you know, protected inside this building, and they had never learned to cover their expressions and their feelings with a social mask like the rest of us learn out in society. So I started taking more and more pictures, and did for the next 2 years, and it became a series of images that I really like. So these guys were the same height, same proportions, and they hung out together all the time. And I like to call this Tweedledum and Tweedledee. This was a guy I tutored. His name was Francis. And he had no reason in the world to be as wonderful a human being as he was. He was 6 years old when he was brought to the institution. He had been an illegitimate child and never saw his relatives again, and was there for 53 years. And somehow he had a sense of decency and fairness. And although his IQ was purported to be 49, you know, he was always game to learn and to grow. And to give you a sense of him, I knew what day his birthday was from the records. And so I came to work that day and said, "Francis, it's your birthday, happy birthday." And he said, "Why, thank you, same to you," which was the perfect gentleman that he was, even if it wasn't the, you know, the appropriate comment. But that comment lives on in my family. We enjoy it all the time. We remember Francis well. This guy was known to scream and shriek for hours and on end. This was one of his better days, and I think those little tags around his neck were reinforcements for good behavior. This guy was the building kleptomaniac, and he was a vision out of Dante's Inferno. He stole stuff from everybody, from staff, residents, didn't matter who, but his punishment was based on his crime. He had to carry everything he stole because the institution had absolutely no places that were safe that he could leave things. So he had to protect them 24/7. And he would pack them tightly. He was an expert packer in these bags, and then he'd have to carry the bags. And of course, he would very aggressively ward off people who tried to get anything back that he had taken. But then there was a time when two of the bigger guys who were working on the staff confronted him. They finally had had enough. And they just stood up to him and made him empty everything out. People were running from all parts of the building, you know, finding things they hadn't seen in years. And here he was putting everything, you know, packing what was left of his booty, you know, back into these bags. And he was, you can see I was getting just a hair too close. He was ready to, you know, punch me if he had to. This person was, he loved costumes, and there was a room where they had a lot of men's clothing of all kinds, and he would go there, I guess, and find things, because I saw him once with a soccer uniform on, and he was carrying a round ball, and he had this big round tummy. I don't have that shot, but I did get this one in a military uniform, and I had seen him out in the field as I was leaving the institution one day, saluting the sunset. But here he is with a couple of decks of cards. So I worked on those for the 2 years longer that I was at the institution. And but I was growing increasingly interested in being in the country, being near lakes and ponds, and discovering the stillness of water and its ability to reflect people. And so I was really getting excited about doing nudes in water and decided to apply for a fellowship. I had been a runner-up for a fellowship from Wellesley College, an alumna traveling fellowship where you had to leave the country for a year. And but this time I was determined I was going to get it, because I was very excited about this work that really came to define my career. So to strengthen my proposal, I realized that, you know, the project I was proposing was a summer project, and I needed a winter project. So I showed the committee the pictures from the institution and proposed to photograph residents on the islands. I started my fellowship I did get the fellowship. I started in Crete, and I had met somebody in Massachusetts, right here in a neighboring town, whose family owned a farm in Heraklion. And moreover, her daughter was studying photography at RISD, and she was going to be living on the farm around the time that I was planning to go there. So I was invited to join her And I did. I started out on the farm, which was great because I was in a community of people. Uh, they were all speaking Greek, and I had to see if I could take my 2 months of learning, and actualize it a little bit. And I was, it was difficult, but the people were so warm and accommodating. It worked out. And and I got to know the people. So this is the foreman of the farm who's sitting in this cave-like room, and the light was bouncing in. This is my favorite kind of light, when you have a really strong kind of sunlight that isn't directly on the figure, but bounces into a space and onto his face in this indirect way, but high tone that really defines the face. So this is was the first portrait, and he was very relaxed around me, so he didn't really cover his emotions at all. Oh yes, I decided. Well, I learned that there was a camera club like yours in Heraklion, and this is 1979. You have to realize to join it was $3. And the dues were $1.50 a month, and they had a dark room. So I knew I could develop film at a pension, but I had no place to print. And it was nice to know that this existed. So I did join and pay my dues. But I went to the other side of the island at quite a distance, and chose a village by the sea, one of the quintessential charming Greek villages, climbs up the hillside with these white houses looking out over the water, and thought I'd found the perfect place. And then I would develop film at the pension, and when I had accumulated a bunch of sheets of film that was developed, I would take 2 buses and go the 6 hours to Heraklion and spend a few days there printing pictures. But the idyllic village that I thought was going to be paradise turned out to be the Wild West. This was the youngest of 4 brothers who terrorized the town, and everybody in Greece knew its name, of Sakia. And, but I hadn't known when I decided to live there. And it turned out that he was the youngest brother and the most benign of them. There were 4, and the eldest was the worst. And it was announced before I left the village that he was moving to the USA. And where was he moving to? But the place where I was born, Hartford, Connecticut. My mother lived in the neighboring town. I never found out what happened, but it probably wasn't good. They would, beat up, the gentler males. There was a really nice guy who would cook in this other restaurant near the seaside, and was an Italian guy. When I first met him, he had a black eye and broken ribs, and courtesy of this bunch. And they ultimately ran him out of town at knife point. So I would go up into the mountains and photograph the older style of life and not spend too much time around that scene. I had wondered when I was packing things, to take to Greece, whether I would find plastic and whether I'd find a razor. Well, never occurred to me that I would find a Bic razor used for this purpose of, shaving the pig for Christmas soup. When I went to a neighboring village by the sea to get some olive oil. There was an olive oil factory there, and there was another person waiting, a woman who lived in the mountain village that I would go to regularly. And it turned out she ran a coffee house herself, different from the one that I tended to go to and stay overnight at. And she said, next time you take the bus and you come to my coffee house, and I'll take you to meet the 100-year-old man. So we did that, and she brought me to this house, which had this wonderful Vermeer-like interior, and I took this picture, and then was taking pictures in the back of the room as I got this kind of feeble old man out of bed, and I wasn't quite sure what I was doing there, and he wasn't sure what I was doing there either. And, but I just kept shooting. And then finally they had him dressed, and they had made him something to eat, and they put him in this doorway. And there he is, sipping his hot goat's milk. And I had by that time loaded my Hasselblad. And this was the light that I loved bouncing up into his face. And so I took this picture, and you can see that he's still, eyeing me pretty angrily. But I remember the exposure. I mean, remember, this is 1979. I remember that I shot this at f/5.6 at a 30th of a second, and to hand hold a Hasselblad, no tripod or anything, with its very forceful mirror, was quite a feat. But I was loosened up from having done all the shooting, and I really, really wanted this picture, which is one of my favorite portraits. So I'd go to all the remote villages. This is up in the foothills of some of the highest mountains on Crete, and took pictures of the older people. This was on the other side of the island. Ultimately, I moved to the other side, still on the south side, but and still had access to the mountains. And people really wanted me to take a picture of this couple, which I had a sense that he was not well, and that's why they wanted it. And my big regret is, although I was able to print extra pictures in that darkroom, I wasn't able to get my print to these people before I left that area. I felt really badly about it, and I still do. One thing I learned in shooting the portraits is that my concept of shooting, these very unique and individual and revealed faces was a supremely American concept. In Greece, there was a whole different ideology about how one is portrayed in a picture. And it's not about your uniqueness, it's about your place in the family. And so if you look over her head, you see all these side by side, very frontal, very stiff, totally forward, pictures, but it's about the seat you're sitting in and who's next to you. So this image speaks to me because there's so many empty chairs around. And in fact, what happened is that a lot of the, in the mountain villages, the young people would have to leave because there was no economy there. They'd go to the bigger cities. So she truly was alone, and most likely her husband had died because she's got wearing the black of the widow. The thing that overrode some of that, frontal directness in their tradition was to, get to know people as I had known the foreman in the farm. And when I went to the island of Mytilene, and Mytilene is the Turkish name for the island, the Greek name is Lesbos, same island, but they called it Mytilene. I lived in a German woman's house that she had bought in the shepherd's district of this one village. And so one of my neighbors was this young woman who was kind of tied to her house. She was the wife of a shepherd, and he was very strict with her not leaving the house except maybe to buy some things to cook. So she had her children, and then she had a lot of the older widows to hang out with. But when life moved into the neighborhood, when an American woman came and was living a few doors away, she just, couldn't get enough of me. And she and her daughter would come and teach me Greek. The daughter would act out words. They were just wonderful. And the other thing is that she, when they had a little extra money, she and her husband, she had a choice of getting a refrigerator or a television set. And she chose the television set, thinking it would keep her husband out of the cafes at night and that, he'd actually spend some time at home. It didn't work, but she did have a TV set, and that led to the next picture, which was our neighbor Evangelitza watching television in Ralu's kitchen. And I thought he looked like a Frans Hals painting, but I didn't have my camera with me when I noticed that. So I told Ralu, I said, I really want to get this shot. And she was thrilled, absolutely thrilled to, photo assist, and anything I wanted, she would just move it around. I mean, she, was so happy to have some life come into her life. So this, this is exactly what I was after. It was getting to be the time of doing the nudes in water. It was warming up, and I continued shooting portraits through, while I was there in Mytilene. But as I worked on the nudes, and I talked about this when I gave the longer talk about that series, the mountains that I've been shooting in, walking around, and observing the water from, just kind of fell into the body. It was all about learning to use the light, and then the imagery just happened of its own accord. I wasn't saying to myself, I'm going to do a body landscape, but I did enjoy watching the contours of the land with the water lapping up and the light shining on it. And I could just keep taking that in over and over again. So I went back a couple summers later. I went back 2 more summers after my fellowship and continued working on the series. This one is a body landscape I made in Santorini that bears some of the essence of Santorini. And then, I had to settle down in the US. I couldn't keep uprooting, and I bought a house. And so I stopped doing the nudes in water for a while, but really missed them. And then I was persuaded that I could work on Cape Cod. And so that's about 8 years later, I began continuing the pictures on Cape Cod. And I have been working on them, pretty steadily since then. I worked on them for a number of years. Until, faces started to enter the pictures. This was shot in 2018, and I thought I'd just, try that. And I learned from doing this picture that if you had a face in profile, it defined itself as a face. If it wasn't in profile, it would just be a blob. In this series, which was reflections into tide pools, I could make the head out of whatever material was in the tide pool if the light was right. So here I was, using that principle, having her turn her head to the side to show her profile. And I would have done the same thing in this picture. And my favorite picture from 2018 was this one. It was after I'd shot that first one I showed you with the reflection on her legs. We had shot for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and stopped shooting. We weren't in a rush. The model didn't have to go anywhere, and I didn't need to be anywhere. And so we decided to hang out at the pond. And I went for a long swim, came back, and it was just getting more glorious by the minute. The clouds were reflecting, the water was completely still. And it was just the most magnificent day. I never shot around 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I always thought about using the lower angles of light, but this was too good to pass up. And so I asked the model if she would be able to stay longer and do some more shooting, and she did. And I'm so glad she did, because this picture really turned a corner for me. It's a real touchstone for what followed. She's looking at her own face, and I still don't understand why she didn't have to be in profile exactly, but something about the light worked, and so that she could look directly at herself. And it's called dialogue, because it's really a conversation she's having with herself. And you get that sense that even though it's a reflection, it's bespeaking something a process going on in her mind. And I remember asking her to push her hands forward like this, and to bring her head closer to her reflection. So she did move. And people want to see this as kind of a Narcissa kind of image, where she's really admiring of herself and, full of good feelings about herself. But I see it as ambiguous because of the way the hands are. It could be a confrontation where she's really having a serious conversation about, what's been happening in her life. And I like ambiguity to show up. I think it's more interesting if people can bring their own thoughts and feelings into an image. So the next year, I guess what I wanted to say, since I'm not reading my notes, is that I do a show in my house every year of every December, I invite people, and it works for me on many levels because I get to, well, I get to pull my work together with a deadline, which helps me. And I get to, show the pictures to other people and get their reactions. But I also get to look at it myself, live with the images, think about them. What do I like? What don't I like? And what do I want to continue with? And of course, that image was so strong that was in my mind to begin 2019 with. I had worked with this guy as a model. We became friends. He was just a wonderful person. And I waited for him to come back. He'd been out of town to take care of an adopted child of his who was in a really, really tough place emotionally. And they had gone to a clinic, which turned out to be the only clinic in the country that could help him. And it did help him, but he had just come back and he was pretty spent, and you'll see more of that. But, so I finally got to work with him, and he put his head down and you get the reflection. And here, you see it, it's a man's face and the reflection of his face. And the light is the kind of light that I often like to work with, which is dappled light on his face and some light spraying on the surface of the water as well, because that will introduce interesting things. And I learned that too from working with my nudes. Dappled light was a favorite kind of light to use. But look what happens in the way I present it. It changes completely. It's like this thought in his mind is dominating, what he's thinking about. It's a presence he can't get rid of. And then the eye works really well because it really has this sense of introspection that is preoccupied with some other thoughts. So I call this phantom. And I really love, what happens when it gets turned, and that it becomes much more activated and much more interesting. I wouldn't even put the other picture out, but this one I do show, and it's gotten into exhibits. And this idea of turning something around is something that I worked on back in the 90s even. This was a series that I was shooting in color film out in the Southwest of people reflected into pools of water on sandstone. And I learned that if I mixed the light up and made an idea kind of happen, that the image would occupy its own space and no longer look turned around, because the first image I used was a little obviously turned around. It was neat, but it still had that, okay, it's a trick. And I don't like trickiness, but I do like to have images that have their own rationale for existing. And I feel this one came into its own space. It talks about the cycle of life. And it worked for me in that series, as did many others, but that was my goal. So I've gotten over this idea of turning things around, and I liken, this taking this freedom to do it to, directing a play. If you have a play on the stage, you have actors, and if you have a bad actor, it calls attention to itself, and it blows the illusion and, the suspension of reality that the audience is willing to give to a good play. So making it, using a strategy like this of turning something around to create the image you want to create is a little like directing a good play. So I did that also a lot with the series of digital images I did in Maine. I left the Cape after shooting there for a long while again, and started working in Maine because I wanted some new material. And these are figures reflected into, the rocks of the tide pools, but then they're turned upside down. So this image is the first one I showed, and I wish I could make 1,000 images like this because it's magical to me. I really just love this image, it's kind of amazing how it happened. I was talking about what was going on in his life, and this person had a great social mask. He was a Southern gentleman. He knew how to present himself in society, but nevertheless, as soon as he was reflected, there was this other side, this deep sadness that was coming out. So if you look at the reflection, it's just a man reflected. You miss it all. It's all there, and you miss all that wonderful information. So, I feel totally justified in turning this. And then I see what the dappled light, the fact that he's in this mix of sunlight and shade, what it does to the reflection, that it makes, you're looking through, this isn't a scar on his face. This is something that's on the surface of the sandiness. It's a shallow pond at that point, and that's underneath on the surface of the pond, as is this and this. But you're hard pressed to know where the flesh reflection ends and the pond begins. And all of this, to my mind, speaks to our fragility of existence and to our mortality, which is something that as I age and my friends age, becomes more a part of our lives. And we have to deal with it and think about it. People are getting illnesses and, and we have, when you can start counting the number of years you have left on your hands, then it gets awkward. So this idea, though, of something sitting on the surface like the reflection does, and something being transparent like that mark that looked like a mark on his forehead was, really came out of, again, observing light and how it worked. This is from the tide pool series, and it's upside down. But when the model was lying at the edge of the tide pool, she had a lot of bright sunlight on her, but she also had deep shade. And the interesting thing is that where the sunlight is reflected, you see it as flesh. Where the shade is reflected, you don't see it as dark flesh, you see it as the bottom of the pool, of the tide pool. So she becomes made up of flesh and stone. And I think that's, really interesting. And it comes to bear in that portrait. So there you see it again. Last summer, I had another shoot that was really interesting with the social mask and the inner person, and kind of two sides showing up in the picture. In the actual picture, you see her eye kind of looking at me, checking me out. Is she safe? Does she have the space to really let go and just go into her feelings? I know this person well, and she rarely takes the time, outside of her life that this gave her, where she just, lay in the water on a beautiful day. And I don't talk much to the people who are posing. So she was just free with her thinking in a way that she hadn't been before. And it took her to some sad things in her life. And we talked afterwards, and I know that this is really accurate, that there is some deep sadness that came up. It's something that when people are standing there in front of a camera, they don't necessarily show you. And it's also interesting that the two eyes do different things. This one is kind of outward, and this one that is reflected, that you don't see, the one that would be over here, is very inward. So I call this portrait because I think it is a true portrait. And I think both of those are extremely true to the people and the moment, and very revealed, which is, what I was always after. But sometimes the pictures do other things. They, you have something conjoined almost, and making another kind of image. This looks like a He-Man, a hero. To my mind, it's always the Lone Ranger, who I knew as a child. I don't know if any of you know of the series, but the Max Man, who's always heroic. That's what I see out of this image. So other things happen, and this is what has led me to call the series Faces right now, because even though there's some really terrific portraits, there are other things going on too. And here you have this, again, another conjoined person, and who looks almost androgynous, a little masculine even here, but it's a lovely woman, and but much more masculine in the reflection, really kind of androgyny. And it was interesting, after she saw the picture and I was talking with her about it, she told me that she was a twin, and she shared the womb with a boy. So she had a twin brother. It's kind of interesting that this is the image that came up. But this is another one of her, and she was about 20, 21. Absolutely perfect skin, which is very different from photographing older people who have, more sags and crags and markings. And, it brings up a different kind of imagery, which actually even though she was a fantastic person to work with, I'm less interested in the photographs of younger people, except maybe for this one. This is a woman in her mid-20s, and we were shooting at a pond in New Hampshire, and there was some siltiness sitting on the sand that got stirred up, and the sun was shining on it and activating it, so it kind of softens the reflection, takes out the detail, and brings up a story. What is this about? What is she thinking about? And to my mind, it's almost marital, bridal. And at the time, she didn't even have a boyfriend, but she was here from Copenhagen a month ago with her Slovakian boyfriend, and it's looking pretty serious. So this might just be a prophetic image. A lot of the images are conversations, where the reflection becomes a conversation with the other person, as dialogue was, kind of following in that tradition. And it always, sometimes there's an insistence coming from the reflection to the person who's really there, even though it is the same person. They look like two completely different people and of different generations even. I love this image. It looks like some sort of encrusted memory. It's a bit macabre, but there's something that really compels me about it. Here, the woman is in rock. She's a much more attractive woman than this, and you have to understand the person. These are hard on the models in some ways, because I'm not, if I were doing a picture like the one of the singer, and I could do that. I could make, a really flattering image of somebody that brings out, the best of their appearance. But something intrigues me about this way that there's a conversation going on, and there's some mortality coming into the image. Is she thinking about getting older? Is she, thinking about dying? I don't know. So there are stories, that come up over and over again. And when I was writing the blurb, I have to find this here. A minute. I was photographing people. This was the blurb that I had written to introduce the talk, and I wrote, "Something mysterious and unpredictable happens when people's faces are reflected on the water's surface. One day, I photographed a friend in her 60s, this woman here, and her reflection looked like that of an elderly woman." It's kind of amazing. You'd think it would be like a mirror, right? And she would look just like the age she is on the right, but she comes up like an older person. And then a few minutes later, she comes up like her own daughter. And then the next day, we went back to that same place. The light was different. We chose a slightly different setting at the same pond, and decided to print the image in color, and her grandmother was back. And why that happens, I don't know, but our, you know, ourselves will morph into many different people. It's kind of remarkable. So there are stories in these. And then sometimes I began photographing just the reflections. This is the same woman looking even older in her reflection. And because of the dapple of the light, you know, of what I was talking about things appearing and disappearing, and she really melds with the environment, and it's really kind of the human condition. You know, her husband and I debated over a title for this, and we decided to call it Beyond Time. So this summer I was traveling in Europe for part of the summer, and I just didn't have a lot of luck doing some new work. And I wanted to do a show in December, but I had to cancel about 5 shoots because the weather wasn't cooperating. And but I was walking along the Charles River, which is right near my house. I can see it from my studio, and the water was absolutely still. It was in October, but of course it's global warming time, and it was a very warm October. And I was thinking, why can't I shoot some pictures right here in my own backyard? So I found somebody to model, and we looked for some stillness, and I was able to put her out on a log, and took this picture, which blew my mind that I could get anything like this. You're seeing trees that are on the other side of the river that are reflecting in. Her arm, she had wanted to move the arm, and I was thinking, yeah, that might be a good idea, partly because she had all these bangles on the arm that she said would take her a half an hour to remove. But she said she couldn't move her arm because her weight was on it and would change everything. So I said, okay, we'll just go with it. And I'm so glad we did, because it really has the sense of the live person taking care of the inner self, you know, and it's an image that speaks to the kind of years we've been having the last few years, you know, living with COVID and being isolated, our lives being constricted quite a bit from what they used to be. And, you know, this has that self-protection that many of us are having to deal with. So I used this as the invitation for my December show. It was shot on October 15th, and it was fine, you know, it worked out. And I got more images that day as well. This image that I had liked so much was shot on November 2nd in the same spot, same log. The model never got wet. I was the one sitting in the water, obviously with my camera above the surface. And I'm one of those swimmers who likes to push the season into October anyway. And so the water temperature really didn't bother me, and it was really quite warm, except that my knees complained when I got up and tried to walk using them. They didn't like that too much. But you know, I was very happy to have an opportunity to shoot that late into the season in my own backyard. So you know, there are a lot of possibilities. So, you know, using a hand with a reflection can be a very potent, expressive tool. Here's her hand also. I think you see her forehead and her hair and her hand, and the rest is reflection. But it looks almost like a movie still. It has a lot of animation in it. This is one I did on the Cape last summer, and it, you know, has a lot of pain and grief in it. So these go in a different direction. They have a life of their own that's different from some of the other pictures I was showing. And again, this is why I'm calling them faces, not necessarily portraits, because they're evoking feelings. This is one of my favorites. This got a lot of good comments in my show, and kind of harkens back to some, you know, ethnic and earlier forms of expression. Some people see it as a mask, and I like the dissolve that happens on the face. It's really quite interesting. So this is the last piece I'll show you. It's really part portrait and part myth. she looks like a goddess here. This was a woman who's a dancer in San Francisco, who was here the summer before last and wanted to be part of the series. She really liked some of the same images I really liked. And I didn't yet know I could shoot them right here in my backyard. So we went up to Gloucester, which on the water, which has some tide pools, and I shot this reflected head there. But it has a power to it that's like a goddess, you know, who has quite a command, you know, over life. She used it for a dance performance that she gave just a couple months ago in San Francisco. It spoke to her about the work that she was creating. So that's, you know, my journey, and I'm very interested to know how you think about this work and what you like, don't like. Any comments would be helpful. I've got a little notepad to take some notes, and I don't know, I'm still sharing my screen, I guess, right? Is that, can you hear me? Grace, are you there? Is anybody there?
One second.
Oh, good, there's somebody there.
Oh.
Huh?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, kind of with an echo. Should I get out of this instead, or what do you think?
It's up to you, but we'd love to have some time for some question and answer. If you can hear, okay?
I can hear. It's a little echoey, but I can hear.
We can't see you, so it'd be nice to
Oh.
see your face. I think.
Yeah, well, why don't I just stop sharing, and we'll see if we need to go back and look at some images, we will, right?
Okay, that's good.
So there I am.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Karen, for sharing your amazing work.
You're very welcome. I hope everybody. I'm sorry?
Hopefully you could hear the applause.
Oh, I didn't hear the applause, no.
Oh, well, there was.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry again for the sound difficulties, but does anyone have any questions? And I don't know if we have a microphone we can pass around, but if you call it out, I can repeat it. Oh, we do actually. Hang on one second.
How many people are in the audience there? I have no idea. How many?
I'm very bad at estimating, but I'm going to say around 60 or so in here.
All I see is a blank opening of the room, you know, front of the room, but I don't see.
Yeah, and there's about 30 online. I think we have too.
Oh, wow.
So quite a good turnout.
Yeah.
So does anyone have any questions
or comments? I mean, you know, I'd love some comments on the work and
comments.
What strikes people well, what they don't like, what works better than, you know, anything, really.
Okay, I have a couple
And
of questions.
questions.
If you don't mind.
Hmm?
Is two, what is the composition of your images? You have a very tight crop, and I was hoping you could speak to how you decide what that crop is to get the effect that you're looking for. That's my first question. The second one is the control of your highlights. You have these gorgeous images, and are you consciously working to make sure you retain that detail in those highlights or not?
You know, in the post-processing, I do a lot about bringing the highlights in and trying to get control. I try to, I underexpose a little bit, and I think that keeps the highlights coming in and not just blasting out. A lot of people say to overexpose, you know, is the proper way to shoot digitally, but I've always underexposed like about 2/3 of a stop. And as far as a tight crop goes, with the reflected pieces, that the ones I showed at the end, where you just see the reflection, I'm trying to just get the reflection. Of course, it's tight to the body because the body's right there, you know, and reflection's happening right to the side of it. So it's cutting it pretty close. And I don't have the freedom with the cropping that I would like to have, but that's what I'm given by the situation. I don't know if, yeah, I guess I am staying tight. It's what's possible, because you know, the way it works, I'm not always getting a lot of extra space around the image to make use of. So I have to work with what I can shoot.
Thank you. Anyone else? Questions? Oh, David? Anyone? Or comments, feedback?
Anne has one. Anne has her hand raised there.
Related to the property question, some of the images were just the reflection without the actual person.
Right.
Did you shoot it that way, or did you have both the person and the reflection and later made a decision in post and cropping to just go with the reflection?
Most of the ones I showed, I shot that way for the reflection. I was starting this summer to do a whole series of just reflections. But then I was, you know, so even when the person, when you had the corner of her eye in that one I called portrait, you know, I was still kind of thinking about the reflection more than I was thinking about including her face in it. That's pretty close to the full width of the frame, I think.
And you notice, yeah, I think it's a one color image.
Yeah.
It really struck me as an outlier. And
Yeah.
not my preference either for the work. You included that for this presentation for what reason? Just to get our impressions, or are you wrestling yourself on whether color might be a way to go on some of these?
I couldn't hear you completely clearly. I'll answer what I think I heard. You know, I just liked every once in a while, you know, because when I'm shooting a black and white JPEG, and that's what I'm thinking black and white, and I'm shooting black and white. But every once in a while, I've had the experience when I'm working digitally where the color image just works for me much better than the black and white does. And so I go with it. And I worry about it later. I just, you know, I'm still at an exploratory phase in this work where I'm just seeing what comes of it. And actually, that last image that I showed of the goddess-like portrait, I printed that in both color and black and white and showed it both ways in my December show. And I almost showed you both of them. I have it. I can show it to you. Actually, if I share my screen again, I can show you what it looks like. It changes completely. It does a whole different thing. It's much more, because instead of being whited out where the light hits her cheek and stuff, it's flesh-like there. And so it softens the image, and it just changes what it means, what it expresses. Most people like the black and white, so that's the one I showed you.
My last comment would just be that I love this stuff. And the follow-up to that, I guess, is a little more of a crass commercialist question, which is a lot of people probably love it and you get wonderful comments, particularly on your new work as well. Is there a market for such a thing? And,
Yeah.
and if so, what sort of people are you? Does it appeal to actually pay for it and hang it on the wall?
Boy, you're breaking up so much. I would love to hear every word. Is there a market for it? I heard. And
if so, what sort of individuals does the work appeal to the point they would want to purchase it and hang it on their wall?
yeah, I don't know. You know, the art market is so strange these days. You know, it's kind of two-tiered, like everything is in our society these days. You know, where you have the very top tier, and then you have the low tier. You know, prints itself for way too much money, and prints itself for way too little money. And then there's some in between, you know, that are trying to break the glass ceiling and can't quite do that. Once you break the glass ceiling, you can charge whatever you want. And you're, you know, if some museum curator deems it important enough, you know, there'll be people who will buy it just because it's well, either they respond to it or they think it's a good investment. I don't know. You know, I've been to APAD, I've sold some work at APAD, and you know, some of the work is just phenomenally expensive. And it's kind of ridiculous. But portraits, I imagine the portrait of J.P. Morgan, because he's a famous person and Steichen is a well-collected artist, there would be a big market for that. You would see prints of it probably over and over again at places like APAD. But portraits don't sell that much. The husband of that woman who morphed into many selves ended up buying one for her. And the woman who I said, kind of hated the picture of herself, looking old. There was a picture that was much more flattering to her that I showed, but I didn't think it was really successful, and I, didn't put it in this show. It wasn't working for my purposes, but for her purposes, it worked. So I gave her a discount on it, and she bought it. And so the people will buy it, and actually the woman in the last picture, the one that's kind of mythic, she loves that picture and is we worked out an arrangement where I gave her a discount and she used it for some of her PR purposes, and she's getting a big print of it from me. So people will take the print of themselves, but they won't necessarily buy another person's picture. And the picture that I keep talking about, the one that was in the opening screen, the guy, looking tragic, I think that, I don't know why everybody doesn't buy that. I don't know why it doesn't get in every show I submit it to. It just, to my mind, is, transcends a common portrait. And, but not everybody wants to hang somebody else's face, especially a tragic face, in their house. And so I'm kind of working beyond, thinking. I never have worked for sales. I've made the work that I wanted to make. And my feeling about it is that I'm free to do whatever I want and go in whatever direction I want, because I have this body of work and I still sell prints of it. And I still will go in the darkroom and print some of the earlier work there. So there's plenty that people can buy. They don't have to buy the latest stuff, but I'm going to keep exploring and growing. And I can afford to do that.
More questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, no question here. I've got a comment here. I just completely involved with what you did.
I can't hear you.
Was amazing to be. Can you hear me?
I can't understand what you're saying. Maybe somebody else can.
Maybe
Okay, I'm too close. But anyway, I just wanted to comment that, and I was completely involved in what you've done here. That was amazing how different the reflection is, how the two faces are. I've seen a lot of presentations like this over the years.
Seen a lot of what?
Presentations, speeches like this with your work, and rarely have I had such an emotional experience. So thank you.
I couldn't understand any of that. I would love to. I just make it
Yeah,
out.
he was raving. Can you hear me?
It's very fuzzy. Maybe somebody who can be understood better could repeat.
Can you hear me okay, Karen?
Yeah, a little better.
Yeah, so it was just very highly complimentary of your work that, he expressed that he was enthralled with it, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful presentation. I can't do full justice to everything he said. It was very complimentary.
Well, that's very nice to hear. Thank you. I
think we might have some Zoom questions.
Maybe he can write, he can send me
She
an
can
email.
see them.
Like, I would love to hear what he
I,
said.
Grace can see them.
Karen,
You
is
can see
there
the Zoom.
one more question?
Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
So in terms of how did you position the models? Were they laying on the water? Were they just slightly above the water? Were they deep in the water? It was really hard to tell.
They were never deep in the water. They were in the shallows, kind of at the edge. And with the guy that I showed first, the one who'd been out of town and came back, he would just sort of hold his head at right at the surface. If you rotate the image, you can kind of see it because you see what's really going on. But I didn't want to cover too much of the face, although I didn't, it's just lucky that he kind of held it there and that it turned well, and they're not submerged. They're kind of at the level, and oh, I know, they often laid on their arms or something so that that would keep them, a little above. Yeah.
So they were pretty much their whole body was for the most part in the water as they were holding their head just above the water.
Or they were coming from the shoreline, and not really in the water, but the head was kind of going through the water. It varied, it depended on the situation. In the case of the ones who were lying on the log at the river here, they never put their face in the water at all. I mean, they were on the log, and so you see the log kind of show up a little bit in the images. The one I said was a little macabre, has some of the edge of that of the log that was kind of carved away, reflecting, and they're not getting very wet. Although the woman who kept morphing, I think her hair got a little wet at first. That was one of the first ones, and she was kind of sitting. She's a yoga instructor, so she's very agile, and she was sitting there, and I think just kind of leaning over. I mean, however it works, it's like putting your face up against a mirror or something. Only the water is the mirror.
Well, thanks, Karen. We just have one more question here. I will just point out there is a comment from Shelley in the chat as well. My comment is that I love the portraits and your work is wonderful. I'm more intrigued by the abstract body portraits without the faces as body landscapes. So just wanted to make sure you saw that comment.
Hear that.
But we do have one more question, and so here we go.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I love the photos. They're gorgeous. And I think I'm particularly drawn to the early ones from Greece. And I wanted to ask if you could say a little bit more about your lighting process. And you have mentioned a little bit like the type of, I guess, the quality of light that you were looking for, but I'd love to hear just a little bit more.
In Greece, I didn't have it. I always work with available light, and I always have. I really don't like lighting gear. I don't like reflectors. I just I want, because when I use my eyes, I learn things. There's a big piece of scientist in me. I was pre-med, and the thing I loved most was looking through a microscope early on in biology, and seeing what was in the petri dish and evaluating it. And I use the camera much the same way. So I'm always puzzling over, I'm really trying to get a visual vocabulary. That's something I didn't say that I meant to talk about, where I can really grasp what's happening with certain kinds of light and how I can make it work for me. But I'm going now for the extremes of light and shade, in what I'm doing. And back in Greece, I mean, it was that bounced intense light, you have direct sunlight, but not on their face. It might be on the ground in front of them and then bouncing up in an iridescence into the face, like with the foreman of the farm or the 100-year-old man. I spoke about how it worked for me there, and those I remember specifically being like that. And wherever possible, with Raulu and her two children, probably there was a door open. This was a country house they had, and probably, I somehow placed them near the door opening so that the light was pouring in and onto them. That brilliant but non-direct light is my favorite for portraits. Do you know Irving Penn and the North Light? If you don't, you should look for some of the books that he did about the Northern Light. It's a non-directional high tone light, because the sun goes from east to west and through the south, but it's never in the north. And the north is I used to have actually where one of those portraits of my friends was shot, the man with the sun, that was in a bedroom I had that had north light, and it was just glorious. I would just set up the tripod, never lit anybody, just use that light.
That's
Yeah.
really, thanks so much, Karen, for sharing that part of your process. And I don't know if you get a chance before you sign off, maybe you can pop the name of that book that you just mentioned into the chat.
Oh, I don't know the name. Look for Irving Penn.
Irving Penn, okay. We'll make a
Yes,
note of that.
and any of his big books, and you can probably look online, and he talks about the North Light, I guess it is, North Light.
Okay,
I don't.
yeah, I'll definitely look
He's
that up.
very well known in my era, and you know, and he's published a lot of work and a lot of books, and he did a whole. Actually, he went to other countries. I think there's some in Peru and some in Africa and stuff, where he'd set up a tent facing the north sky and put people in the tent, you know, and he created a little studio and then used the light to illuminate them. And
Oh, very cool.
it's a beautiful quality of
Thank you
light.
thank you so much for sharing this work with us. We really appreciated it. We'll just say thank you one more time and we'll let you go. But we've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks so much, Karen. Really appreciate it.
You all. Thanks for your comments.
Okay, well, we'll let you get to bed now. Okay, we're gonna take a short break.
Of these, right?
Okay.
You need that. Well, here's that. Wait a minute, don't talk. Okay.
All right, we're ready to begin again. Would you please take your seats?
Yeah.
Now, I would like to point out that we have a new projector which allows us to present bigger images, and hopefully we'll see a vast improvement over our prior projector. So we're going to write the winners of the best photos of the year. And here we go. So assigned subject winner was Into the Trees by Darby Davenport. And just hold your applause till we get through them all, okay? Then we'll give them a big round of applause. Best abstract was Fall Reflections by our projectionist, George Papel. Architecture was Manhattan Bridge Last Night, Bill Wages, photographer. Fauna winner was Big Gulp by Bob Free. Flora was Calla Lilies by our membership chair, Barbara Summers. Natural Landscape, Winter in the Washington Ridge Forest, again by George Papel. Was a tie for night photography. Tom, how do you pronounce that? Kilauea, Mountain Dew.
David.
Oh, Dave, no, Dave McClellan. That's not right. That's Tom Quinn's photo, isn't it? Yeah, well, we got a little something got screwy there, but that's Tom Quinn's photo. And then the other winner was New York City Lights by Bill Wages. Best People, Acrobatic Heights by Douglas Hooper. Journalism, Surfer aids baby dolphin while waiting for Marine Rescue Team by Ann Westling. Travel was also a tie. Matora Monasteries, Greece by Ed Sylvester, and Laundry Day by Rachel Rosenthal. That's not the right image, is it? No, it was yeah. Somebody's idea of a joke, but that was the image that Rachel wanted. Creative Fantasy was New Birth of Venus with A Red Mask by Robert Arnold. Manipulated but Realistic was After the Storm by David McClellan. Black and White winner was Seaside Creek Beach, again by Dave McClellan. Color Buckeye by Bob Free. Beginner was Green Door by Patricia Leviton. Best phone photo was Seaside Creek Beach by Dave McClellan, again. And best photo of the year that you voted for was Into the Trees by Darby Davenport. Darby won both the assigned subject and best photo of the year. It was this photo here. So how about a okay, we're going to move into the critique portion of the show, and I'll turn the microphone over to Grace.
All right, well, thanks for our critiquers tonight, Jim Slober and Janice Rossner. We're going to dive right in. We have a lot of images that got submitted, so thank you all for who participated for submitting your images. So we will get started. And we're getting it up. The first, of course, we'll be starting as usual with the assigned subject, which, as a reminder, was still life for this month.
No.
And we'll get started in just a second.
Okay. Do they see you as a widow? Yes. Says that we're sharing your screen, George. Yeah, but I don't see. Is this multiple participants? We should make them multiple participants to share. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting started, and this is rock and leaves.
Well, now he.
Remember,
But
my
I don't-
comments
I
are
don't
just
see
my
it.
subjective opinion. The maker has given us a highly manipulative.
One second, we lost the image. We'll start over.
The exposure's good. I like the black background again. That was well done. I think a small nitpick for me is the blue fringe on the left. It seems to be some kind of artifact. Because the light is coming from the other direction. So that could be lit on there. And then also there's a little green line at the very top of the photo, and that would need to remove. Otherwise, a very nice photo.
And the artist is Lori Woodhall. Next is Objects and Fruit.
I love the overall tones in this image, but for my eye, there was too much going on, and I found myself flitting around the image. I didn't understand the light streaks, and I found them distracting, and I wasn't sure how they related to the fruits and the other object. I think that the shapes are interesting, but I'm also not sure how these shapes relate to the fruit. The green drape in the background is lovely with beautiful tones, and I think it would help to unify the image if the drape was extended over the table. And additionally, I would suggest moving the label from the apple.
The artist is Jonathan Beth. Next, Still Living in Bodie.
Again, a really nice play on words for that title. I find this to be a very creative, and I compliment the maker for such a beautiful composite photo. I like the maker's manipulation of the opaqueness of the second image, of the inside image. And did a good job. The top of the mannequin is allowed to come through, but the rest of the mannequin is more ghost-like to let the outside image come through. So well done. Well, I find it works well. There's a small suggestion would be the window is a little bit keystone, and maybe that could be corrected. Otherwise, a very nice image.
And the artist is Chris Schiller. Next is Crunchy, Juicy, and Sweet.
So I thought this was another beautifully arranged still life with nice lighting and a well thought out composition. In my opinion, the elements work well together with the repeated curves. Although subtle, the curve of the handle is a necessary element with the tie that ties the shape of the box to the berries and the apples and the base. And it also provides visual interest but doesn't dominate the primary subjects. The photographer was also smart to provide a table covering, box, and vase that supports but don't draw attention away from the subjects. And I thought the photographer also did a nice job with the angle of the light so as to highlight the color and shapes of the subjects.
The artist is Suzanne Hamilton. Next is the Gilded Canary.
I find this to be a very pleasing image. The amber tones contrast nicely with the black background. I like how the curve of the glass matches the curve of the bottle. I like the shallow depth of field. I agree with the maker's choice to leave a good bit of negative space above. I suggest trying to remove the silver brown object at the very bottom of the bottle. It doesn't seem to belong there. That's it.
Artist is Darby Davenport. Next is Still Dahlias.
So I have to confess that dahlias are one of my favorite flowers. And I thought this was just a beautifully arranged and really well lit image. In flowers with this much detail, it's really easily to have some of the petals casting shadows on the other petals. And so whoever lit this did an excellent job of avoiding that issue. I love the detail of the flowers, and although they are all dahlias, the photographer included different types, so there's variety in texture and some variety in color. I found my eye moving around the image and noticing more and more as I looked at it. It's one of those images that just kind of keeps on giving. My only criticism is that I would like to have had a flower in the center lower foreground. As I found my eye being drawn there, and in my opinion, the stems and leaves didn't work as well as another flower.
And the artist is Ingrid Lockhart. Moving on to our next subject, abstract. First up is explosion.
This is a monochromatic image, and it's a study of textures and shapes. It reminds me of looking through an astronomical telescope in deep space, like maybe looking at stars or nebulas or something. I would have liked to have seen more detail in the ice. And it's a suggestion I have would be to attempt to have a light source down flat coming across it to highlight the things a little bit more, to give you more of a point of interest to focus on. Otherwise, it's a very nice image.
The artist is Sheila Ryan. Next, Picasso Marble Macro.
So I thought this was really interesting piece of marble, and with lots to look at. I love the colors in it, and I'm wondering if the photographer experimented with different compositions, because we have that prominent black line right in the middle that kind of divides the two sides. And that might have been the intent of the photographer, but it was something that really stood out to me that I noticed. And on my monitor, there wasn't anything that was really real sharp. And so that I found myself wandering around in the image, but I didn't have a place to land. And I thought maybe if something was one element and there had been more sharp than another, it would have been helpful with that. But I really like this marble. I like this a lot.
The artist is Daniel Chaplin. Next, Power Wash.
This image conveys to me the immense power of water. Well focused and a fast shutter speed is apparent. That's a nice contrast to the often seen smoothing effect of a slow shutter speed. The yellow tones seem to be sediment in the water. That's a very nice image. I have no suggestion to improve this.
The artist is George Pelpel. And next is Logs.
I love the subtle colors in here with the blues and the yellows. And I thought this was very interesting. Obviously an old log. I love old wood. The one element that didn't work so well for me was the prominent crack in the upper center. It drew my eye, but didn't lead me anywhere. And I'm wondering what other points of view the photographer experimented with in this one, but really well exposed, nice lighting. I like this.
And the artist is June Anderson. Next subject is architecture. And first is no skateboarding.
I find this to be an interesting image with the absurd sign banning skateboarding. I assume the sign was put up during better times for this building. The maker is giving us a view through two openings. I find the repeating patterns of both brick walls to be attractive. The second opening is very dark in there, and the rest of the image is pretty bright. So my suggestion would be to try to get rid of some of the harshness of the shadows of that truss, and to crop the image about 1/3 from the left to come into the shadows, and about 1/3 to half on the bottom to come in. You still preserve the no skateboarding sign, and the rest of the image would be a little bit larger and fill it up.
And the artist is Ray Lecce, and I apologize in advance if I am mispronouncing names. Next, Dublin Fancy Door.
This is a beautiful door photo and really intriguing, and I like the repetition of all of the lines and the black outlines that are repeated in the railings. I thought it was beautifully composed, and I'd love to go through those doors and see them. The only thing that I thought about was this is all about the horizontal and vertical lines, and then we have the chaotic lines of the vine. And I wondered how this image would be different when the vine was leafed out and the chaotic lines weren't as prominent. So, but it's well exposed and very nicely lit, and I like this a lot.
And the artist is Gary Krugstadler. Next is Skyline Abu Dhabi.
A very well done image of a beautiful skyline. The close foreground gives the immense building a sense of scale. The flagpole is nicely aligned with the brown building. The right side could be cropped a little bit to line up with the white building on the right side, and nothing would be lost from that. Nice image.
And the artist is Ed Sylvester. Moving on to fauna. First is Cedar Waxwing Discussion.
This image is well exposed and the birds are sharp. And I love it when you can catch this kind of behavior. I imagine this is some sort of a territorial dispute or something that got me wondering, what was going on. I like how the photographer was able to get a point of view that didn't have branches in front of the birds, which in that kind of a tree is difficult. There is a branch going through the bill and the head of the bird on the left. And while I really like the colors in the background, and I think they complement the birds nicely, I think that they're a little overpowering, and it wouldn't be difficult to take those colors down and the brights down, which would give more attention to the birds, but a really fun image.
The artist is Brian Dunbar. Next, Don't Try It.
I find this to be an amazing photo. Definitely being in the right place at the right time. You can just feel the tension that exists out there between these animals. This photo epitomizes having a story. A viewer of this will definitely get sucked right into that story. What a great photo. I have no suggestions for improvements.
Artist is Janice Rosner. Next, All Puffed Up and Pretty.
Okay, so I love quail, and I just love the colors on the quail and how the background of this image complements the colors of the quail. The photographer was lucky to find this quail posing in front of a nice background. The one thing about this is this, I put this into Photoshop, and this was taken at f4. And it didn't seem to be enough depth of field to maintain the sharpness throughout the bird. His chest feathers are really sharp and have nice detail and show, but the plumes and the tail are not. And in this plumage, I think it's in my opinion, it's important to have the head and the plumes sharp. And then this is a little thing, I would crop out that, whatever that round thing is on the side, which in my opinion, doesn't add anything to the photograph, but because it's bright, it's a distraction.
The artist is Melanie Prusa. Next, Sandhill taking off.
Another really great image. It's tack sharp, narrow depth of field. I thought about cropping out some of the sky, but after looking at it, I prefer the maker's choice. Nice photo.
And the artist is Hanu Bapa. Next, flamingos.
I love photographing flamingos. They're such beautiful, graceful birds, and they've got such interesting feather. In this case, I think that the photographer had quite a challenge. The scene is very contrasty and bright, and it's causing the birds in the background and some of the water to be blown out, while the birds in the foreground, are darker. The speckled light also causes uneven light on the birds, but it just interferes with some of the beautiful feather detail. And I was wondering, I just kind of put my hands up on the screen and played with this a little bit. And if the photographer, and there's water here, so maybe it wasn't possible, could move to the left, so as the birds in the front were more prominent, and there was more separation between those two birds, that would be a suggestion that I would have.
The artist is Gary Emanuel. Next, cleared for takeoff.
Nice action shot, showing us birds in all their majesty. The left bird is very sharp, while the right bird is a little soft. It suggests to me that possibly the maker is using some kind of eye tracking or something. A wide area focus mode might have cured this, but otherwise it's a very interesting photo.
The artist is David Nelson. Next, Far From Home.
So I thought this was a beautiful catch of this hummingbird in flight, and a good job with the overall exposure and showing the iridescence then on the feathers. The bird is mostly in focus, and it's not really an issue to have the tips of the tail feathers soft, but the beak is also soft, and it's the beak and head are prominent. So to me, this having the soft beak was distracting, and I would increase the depth of field. On a bird like this, you have to have this aperture was 5.6, and you needed a little bit more for this. So beautiful, just beautiful flight capture of a hummingbird, which is hard to do.
The artist is Bob Free. Next, Monarch Butterfly.
A nice macro photo with beautiful contrasting colors. I like the square aspect ratio. These close-up photos typically have a very narrow depth of field. Here the flower is sharply focused, while the butterfly is a bit soft. In the same situation in the future, you need to try a smaller aperture, wider depth of field.
The artist is Gary Emanuel. Next is Wintering Monarchs.
So this image tells a good story of these butterflies. I thought that the photographer did a good job with the background, which is pretty, but allows the busyness and the detail of the multitude of butterflies to shine. I think if the background had any more detail in it, it would have kind of overpowered these butterflies. And the butterflies are sharp throughout. My only suggestion would be to decrease the brightness of the top background, which I noticed drew my eye away from the butterflies.
And the artist is Eric Ingalls. Next is two sandhill cranes hanging out.
Such beautiful, graceful birds. This image gives us a glimpse into the bonding of sandhill cranes, which they mate for life. So it's kind of cool that they're, kind of know that they're a couple. Nice depth of field, no recommendations here.
The artist is David Nelson. And Canada geese on Golden Pond 2.
So these are beautiful tones in the water, which is lovely. And the geese are nice and sharp. The blacks on the geese seem to have been a little bit underexposed, or maybe just not taken up much in Photoshop. And there's some loss of feather detail in the blacks. When I took it into Photoshop, I thought that there was enough room in the brights of the water that the photographer could increase the exposure on the geese and not blow out the brights. In my opinion, this image, this water is absolutely gorgeous. But I'm wondering if the point of view of the photographer, if they could have moved, because we have, in my opinion, the photograph is more heavily weighted on the right, and there's not enough to balance it out, and it would just be a matter of a crop or changing your position when you were photographing these. But I just thought this was beautiful.
The artist is Jerry Thomas. Moving on to Flora. First up, Agave 2.
I love this photo. It's well exposed and it has a pleasing depth of field. My favorite aspect though is the way that all of the lines kind of converge in the center to bring your eye there. So it's very attractive. I have no suggestions for improvements.
The artist is Anne Westling. Next is Just Leaves.
I like the arrangement of the leaves and the softness of the background. The tones on the orange leaves is really pleasing and beautiful. You can see that light coming through the leaves. Much of the image is soft, which may be due to its small file size, and then the size it's blown up. I don't know, but I just noticed that. It also was shot at a slow shutter speed, so that could be the reason. I think that the composition could work with a couple of modifications. One, the white spot in the bottom is very distracting, and so the lower foreground needs to have the same tones as the rest of the background. And then in the future, I would encourage the photographer to step back and include the bottom, the point on the prominent leaf right, because all of the rest have their points on it, and then this one is cut off. And so I think compositionally it would work a little bit better if it wasn't cut off, in my opinion.
And the artist is Patricia Levitan. Next is 2022 December Christmas Cactus.
That's another amazing photo. The colors are just gorgeous. The exposure looks like it's pretty complicated. The light source looks like it's from above, and probably a fast shutter speed is how they got the black background. My only nitpick really is there's a kind of purple fringing on several of the leaves that doesn't look natural. I don't know whether that's an artifact from post-processing, but it's something to give some attention to. Good job, nice photo.
Excuse me, the artist is Fred Parsons. Next is Winter.
I like this concept, and in my opinion, the photographer was successful in illustrating the chaos of the leafless branches. There was adequate depth of field to having everything sharp, and I thought that the image was real interesting. When my eye wandered around looking at all the intricacies of the branches. I did put it into Photoshop, and the bright areas of the snow are blown enough that the snow loses some texture. So that can be really challenging to photograph snow in the sun. And so I would suggest taking down those brights on the snow.
The artist is Sheila Ryan. Now we move on to natural landscape and Deer Creek 2023.
We see brightly lit cedars upstream, Deer Creek flowing into the darker forest. From this viewpoint, looking upstream, you see an attractive vanishing point. To my eye, the photo would be marginally improved if you brought up some of the shadows down below. But otherwise, it's a great photo.
And the artist is Tanya Baca. Next is Wind Over the Dunes.
This is actually my photo, photographed in the desert. So.
Oh. Well, it looks really nice. That's Jen Swanson's. Okay, moving on is Winter Magic.
Okay. There's so much to like about this photo. The fog and the snow enhance the remaining elements. The Merced River, Yosemite Valley is nicely composed. The leaning tree rises to near the top of the image while its reflection extends to the bottom. Nicely cropped. I have no suggestions to improve this.
And the artist is Anita Duprat. Next, Autumn Light in the High Country.
Well, there's nothing like our high Sierras, and the alpine blue of the water is one of the elements that makes the Sierras just spectacular. I love the image as well exposed, and the composition works with the prominent yellow diagonal leading line to the lake, and the other more subtle diagonals that all lead into the lake. Were I in charge of the weather, in this case, I would have wanted all of the sky to be blue, but that's just okay. But on my monitor, the whole image seemed to be a little over sharpened. It had some artifact in it. It's not as visible up here, but.
And the artist is Tom Quinn. Next is Spring Creek after the early storms.
Very interesting photo. It is apparent that the maker's position of the camera very close to the rocks and smoothing the flow of water with a slow shutter speed. I find my most interesting part is the long smooth stream from the upper right down into the middle of the photo. I believe if you cropped off about a quarter of the way from the left side, it would become a stronger photo.
And the artist is Henry Goodman. Next is Ireland Cliffs of Moher.
So I like this composition. I thought that it worked well with the diagonal line, taking the viewer out to the lighthouse and the sea beyond. There's quite a tonal range in this image, and the photographer did a good job without blowing out the whites and maintaining some detail in the dark. I would enjoy seeing more detail in the cliffs, which could be accomplished in post with a bit more light and contrast on them. The image was made at f5.6, which also left the foreground grasses out of focus, and they're light, and so they drew my eye. And I think that the photographer could handle the grasses in a couple of ways. If it was a windy day, you could even slow down the shutter speed more, and the grasses could reflect the wind, or the photographer could increase the depth of field and have the grasses be sharp. As they appear now, they're just blurred. But that's just my opinion.
And the artist is Gary Clark-Staffner. This must be heaven.
I really like the title. The panorama aspect ratio works well to show the viewer more birds. The foreground, the band of yellow sunflowers in the foreground nicely contrasts with the lighter out of focus upper part. This is a pleasing image to me, and I have no suggestions.
The artist is Rachel Rosenthal. Next is Black Swan Preserve.
So I think the photographer gave themselves quite a challenge with this image. It's well exposed and sharp throughout and conveys the story of winter. My eye wants to land on the bright bushes in the center of the image, which I'm assuming is the primary subject. I put this image into Photoshop, and while the bushes aren't blown in the true sense, they're quite bright and they lack detail. So I would just kind of take it back and work on that. And then for my taste, I'd like to see the contrast and detail of the bushes have more difference with the water. And I think it would help both of those different elements to stand out a little bit more. Currently, the light across the scene gives equal value to everything, which makes it hard for the eye to land in any one spot. And I think with some subtle work on the contrast, this could be an even more amazing image. I like this a lot and like the reflection.
And the artist is June Anderson. Next is Crater Lake at Night.
This is a very impressive photo. It's apparent that the maker planned for the right day to be there without a moon, the Milky Way in just the right position, adjusted his focus for sharp pinpoint stars, had warm clothes, the right kind of white balance clothes, it's tough. This is, been there. This is like 10, 11,000 feet elevation. Some suggestions here would be to try playing with some luminance masks to try to take the green light pollution down to more look like the rest of the sky.
The artist is George Pompel. Next is One.
So this is a nice composition with the rocks and water leading your eye into the image. I like the texture of the granite boulders, and this image tells the story of our recent excessive rains. I took the image into Photoshop, and while the whites aren't blown, the large blocks of white do lack detail. So I experimented with adding some contrast to the water, which gave it more detail and still retained the silkiness. There was direct sun on this image, and I'm wondering how the image would be different in the morning or the afternoon light. But I like the red willows in the back, and this just kind of tells the story of winter.
The artist is Emily Weissman. On to night photography, we have Menorca Chamber Zoom 2.
This is an interesting night scene from an ancient time. One can imagine that they're looking at the same night sky over millenniums. The scene has good focus, as the stars are nice pinpoints. The long exposure allows our camera sensors to capture much more than we can see with our unaided eyes. The Milky Way is amazing in this image. To further improve this image, I recommend the maker reduce the blue cast to the night sky. We can kind of see the upper corners have black sky, but I think the blue cast is partly light pollution and possibly incorrect white balance. Typically, shooting night skies, you might adjust your white balance to around 3,600. Also consider light pollution filters for your camera. It is a very stunning image, as is though.
And the artist is John Siebert. And that was the only one for night photography, so on to people. Summer Nights 2022.
So I thought this was a fun image that kind of captured the spirit of summer nights. I love her rainbow and umbrella and the sparkly glasses and her big smile. I like the position of the subject in the foreground with the booths visible but not prominent. And I found myself wishing that the umbrella wasn't merged within the newspaper boxes. And I also found myself wanting more light on her. I like the backlighting through the umbrella, and I think that some of that light could have been bounced back onto her with the use of a reflector. And then this is kind of small, but the tents over on the right edge are blown, and so they kind of draw your line, because your eye, because they're much brighter than she is, and even than her jewels and her glasses.
The artist is Emily Weissman. Next, it's A Family Affair.
A very nice group portrait shot with natural backlight. The children's hair is nicely, has a nice glow to it. Kind of a general comment about photos is we're always kind of like to have a story. And anybody looking at this photo can just get immersed and make up their own story. What a happy looking family. It's my opinion that the photo could be a little bit stronger if we cropped down from the top to just below the bird figure up in the upper left-hand corner. It wouldn't change anything from the main subject, but they would just be a little bit tighter. It's a nice photo.
The artist is Rachel Rosenthal. Next is Just Married.
So I think the expressions on these faces tell it all. In my opinion, it's well composed, well exposed image, and it tells a great story. The depth of field works well with the subjects being sharp and the background recognizable but less focused. My only suggestion would be to take down the brights in the background. They're not blown, but they are as bright or brighter than the bride. And in my opinion, they draw your eye away from her, and the couple should be the focus. I think it's a really nice wedding image that tells a very happy story.
The artist is Bob Brandstrom. Next is the photographer photograph.
Another nice portrait telling a story. Nice sharp focus with a shallow depth of field. My only suggestion was that I wish for a bit more space above the photographer's head, but well done.
The artist is Brad Almer. Next is Have I Seen You Before?
So these kids are just like adorable. And I love that inquisitive expression. And I didn't mind at all that the child in the foreground is less sharp, as you don't see a lot of his face, and he's not really the subject. And the depth of field keeps your attention on the boy that's watching him. It also perpetuates some of the mystery as to if he's a stranger or not. I wish that the photographer could have moved to the left a little bit to eliminate the diagonal shadow that runs across the subject child's clothes and face. And then some of the whites in both of their shirts are blown, as is parts of the child's nose. Really, really cute, and a very good story in this photo.
The artist is Bob Brandstrom. Next is Reverence.
Nice to do the image with found light from above to the right. It's well focused. I find that the black background enhances your subject. A very fine image, and I congratulate the maker. I have no suggestions for improvements.
The artist is Bob Free. Next is Young Woman, Saudi Arabia.
I think this image could also be titled "The Eyes Have It." Given our recent collective experience with having to cover our faces, this image makes clear how much you can express with just your eyes. Despite her covering, her communication is very clear. I'm impressed with the way the photographer exposed this image, as given the brightness and the need to not overexpose the light colors, it would have been easy to underexpose the black, which have been kind of the kiss of death in this image because there's so much of it. But you can see the subtle texture of the fabric, and I like the little bit of color that the beads bring to the image, which complements her eye color. I think this is an intriguing and really interesting image.
The artist is Ed Sylvester. Next is photojournalism, and the first image is unusual supermom supports 2 elephant seal pups.
Nice, heartwarming image. It appears to have a strong light coming from the left side and dark shadows on the right. The maker's use of exposure seems masterful to me, allowing the shadows to remain very dark while still retaining all the essential details. It may be more manipulated than is allowed for this category, but I just love this photo. It would also work well as a black and white.
The artist is Ann Westling. Next is Highway 49 fire, November 27th, 2022.
So I love the composition of this image with the lines of cars visible in the rear view mirrors and in the smoke ahead and the back of the fire engine and the firefighter. Talk about photojournalism. The story is all, just right here. My only criticism is that the large clouds of smoke are blown, so they appear kind of blobby. That word's okay. And I think that they would be more effective if they had a little bit more detail. And you can see kind of the subtle detail of the smoke, and they wouldn't. I think it would just be more effective if they were not that solid, blown white.
The artist is Fred Clausens. Next, we go into travel, Lightning House off the coast of Maine.
I can just say, wow, nice capture. I can imagine the maker took many photos trying to get one to line up. So good job. I congratulate you on this very fine image. No suggestions.
And the artist is Allison Colt. Next is Valley Stone Steps with Frangipani. I hope I said that right.
So I think it's interesting how an image can convey a sense of the exotic with nothing but stone steps and flowers. In my opinion, this is a beautifully crafted image with excellent exposure and even lighting throughout. I love that all the textures and moss on the stone is visible. And again, my only criticism would be that some of the whites on the flowers are blown, and the flowers are so beautiful. I think if you took some of that down, it would even bring out more texture in the flowers, and the flowers are an essential element in this image.
And the artist is Fred Finney. Next is Golden Hour in the Emerald Isle.
Great travel photo. Strong foreground, leading your eyes right down into the scene. Maker used a long exposure to smooth the ocean and to allow for small aperture or deep depth of field. The maker might consider cropping the sky and distant islands off the image to see which way the photographer thought was best. Great photo.
The artist is Allison Colt. Next is Osorno Volcano.
So I like the placement of the elements in this composition with the volcano and tree creating a visual line from front to back. I also like the tones in the water and all the interesting texture on the rocks. So I think that the concept of this image is successful. On my monitor, the image was kind of distractingly over sharpened, and the artifact detracted from the texture and shape on the rocks. But I think that that could be taken down, and this is a nice image.
The artist is Bill Hopman. Next is Menorca Lighthouse.
Also a nice strong foreground leading your eyes towards the lighthouse. I like your choice of placing the subject in the center of the photo. Again, another well-timed photo of beautiful stormy skies at sunset. Well done.
The artist is John Siebert. Next is Lauterbrunnen Peaks.
So I really like this composition, and I have to fully admit that when I looked at this, it took me back to when I was a girl and saw the original Heidi movie. So I like the placement of the elements in the image with the structure on the right, balancing the heavy trees in the lower left. And I also like the intersecting diagonals. On my monitor, it doesn't look so much here. On my monitor, the sky looked real kind of gray, dark blue. So that was just something that I thought should be changed, but it doesn't look as much on this monitor. And it's a really contrasty image. And in my experience, you have to compensate for the effect of the bright snow on the camera meter. That said, I think that the photographer did a good job in bringing out the detail in the darks, and some of the bright parts of the snow could be taken down, but I like this. I'm waiting for Heidi to come out.
And the artist is Craig Rorson. Next is Bird on Berg, Iceland.
This photo is a mix of sunlight and stormy weather. I looked this photo in black and white to see if it seems to be a bit stronger, but well done, thanks.
And the artist is Fred Finney. Next is Castleloo Castle in Killarney Island, Ireland.
So in my opinion, this is a well-composed and well-exposed image. I like all the different textures of the stone, and then the grass and the trees, that old stone really tells the story. So my only criticism, I thought, was that round thing in the lower right corner. I wasn't sure what it was, and it just interrupted the vertical shapes. And I didn't understand what, I didn't understand that, but the photographer probably couldn't remove it, or I mean, maybe it's a big rock, I don't know, maybe it's the light, part of the light, but it did stand out to me. I think this, aside from that, this is a beautiful, well executed image.
The artist is Douglas Hooper. Next is Mosque in Abu Dhabi, custom.
This photo is exposed beautifully. All of the detail is preserved in the dark area. The maker has chosen to leave it fairly dark in order to lead your eyes into the opening. Great depth of field. I converted it to black and white, but I think it's stronger as is. Well done.
The artist is Bernadette Sylvester. And we have mariachis.
Well, this was a challenging image to photograph people dressed in black against the bright background, but the photographer was able to maintain some details in the blacks and not blow anything out. So I thought that the exposure was very successful. I love the detail in the instruments and the expressions on the player's face, which kind of gives you a peek into their personality. And I love the warm tones in the image and the textures on the floor and the wall. So my only thought when I saw this was, I really liked The guy on the end and the two guys on the end, I thought stood out better. And then the three guys in the middle that had parts of the window coming out of their head, I thought that detracted from the people. And I'm wondering if there was space in this area to move everybody not up against the wall. And then the guy in the middle, I would have told him to raise his hat because he has this shadow in the middle of the space. But other than that, I thought this was a fun image. You can kind of almost hear them playing.
And the artist is Mike Shea. For creative fantasy, we just have two. So the first one is blowing bubbles.
I'm just amazed at the creative talent displayed in this photo. Notice the well-exposed and nicely focused model. That could be a nice photo just by herself. Then the maker has done a graduated exposure of the background texture, going from the textured silver to an all white as you go from left to right. Then we get the three-dimensional aspect of all the clone bubbles. I wonder about the top of the head missing, but I think it's just fine the way it is. Congratulations on this nice photo.
Our artist is Robert Arnold. Next is 6 months solarograph of the garden.
So I thought this was a really interesting image, and I think that the photographer did a good job with the placement of the camera, and the sun did a good job with the circular composition that keeps your eye moving around the image. And I particularly like the tree branches that are silhouetted against the bright sun path. I just found myself kind of wandering around in this image for quite some time. All in all, I think it's an interesting image, and great job.
Our artist is Ellen Davis. We have 3 entries in manipulated but realistic. First is after the Yosemite fire.
The maker's given us an image that evokes the horror of the destruction due to wildfires. Choosing black and white, reducing the contrast, reinforces the horror of the scene. I have no suggestions.
The artist is Ingrid Lockhart. Next is Honey Lake and Cattle.
So this is a peaceful pastoral scene, and I think the cows are lucky to have such a nice place to graze. I like the soft tones of the water and the pasture that merge into the distant mountains. In my opinion, while the sky has a nice color, it's kind of overpowering the peaceful scene. And I'm assuming that this was a sky replacement, which is why this is in here. And so there's quite a few clouds that weight the sky on the left, but there's no shadow thrown by the clouds in the lower left. So that part of it I didn't think worked as well, but all of that, those adjustments, can be made. I like the tones in this image.
And the artist is Jerry Thomas. And next is Dreams in the Mist.
This image nicely matches the title. I like having more space to the right of the model. The ripples in the water and the water draining from her hands give it a nice sense of motion. Well done.
And the artist is Darby Davenport. The black and white, and you're starting with Locomotive Springs.
So this is another image with nice even light that shows the texture and wear and tear on the springs. And kudos to the photographer for taking something as simple as 3 springs and using them to tell kind of the story of the strength of the locomotives. I think this is a really well done image, and there's just all kinds of places to wander around here and look in your eye. And I like this image a lot.
The artist is Daniel Chaplin. Next is Wild West on Broad Street.
well exposed photo, great detail in the blacks, and nice highlights on his hair from the backside light. The title nicely matches his look, that maybe he's looking for a gunfight. I suggest darkening the bright area to the lower right. In a do-over, it might be a stronger image if both men were in focus, but it works as is.
The artist is Brad Oliver, and then almost made it to town.
Yeah, this image made me laugh as well. I thought it was a really well thought out composition, with the photographer choosing a point of view that told a good story. I like how careful the photographer was to not have the horizon running through the top of the car. The image is well exposed with a full range of tones. I would experiment with taking down the brightness of the grass in the foreground, as I see the old car as the primary subject, and the grass is the brightest thing and competes with the car. I'd also just experiment with putting a bit more light on the buildings as the clouds compete with them for attention in the background. But those are small things, and I think that this is a real successful image that tells an interesting story.
The artist is Tom Quinn. We're getting to our final two categories. First here is color, and first up is the angler of Pacifica Pier.
Each viewer gets their own story. I see the angler bundled up against the cold and wind, but the lure of fishing is stronger than cold and wind. I thought about cropping, but I think the photo is better as is.
The artist is Ellen Davis. Next is Rainy Winter Leaves.
So I love the range of colors in these leaves, everything from, practically black to light yellow. It's a nicely composed image with none of the branches falling off the bottom of the frame, which is easy to do in this kind of an image. The photographer's done a nice job of keeping the borders fairly clean and exposing for the detail and the colors of the leaves. Just a suggestion would be to darken the background on the left, as the brights, I think, competes for attention. And if you look at how the leaves on the right stand out with the darker background, and then the leaves on the left don't stand out a little bit less, I think that in post you could take down some of those brights on the left, and it would help those leaves on the left to stand out more. But that's just a little thing. Anyway, really pretty, really pretty.
The artist is Brian Dunbar. Next is Coso Sheep Petroglyphs.
Nice sharp image, great sky. The petroglyphs remind us of how many centuries California has been populated. I suggest looking at cropping to make the petroglyphs more prominent. The tree on the right is on the border and somewhat distracting, so I would crop in on the right a little bit to eliminate that tree. And then I would crop in on the left up to the point where we have the three Joshua trees together, and I would keep them in the image. And then in turn, I would come down in the sky to make this closer to a square image. Nice scene.
The artist is Chris Schiller. Next is Land and More Land.
Well, in the spirit of a fair disclosure, I have to say that I had to sit with this image for a few minutes, as it was hard for me. I'm a longtime vegetarian, and I just don't. I don't relate to animals in this way. So I actually had to just leave it up on the monitor and kind of go and do something else, and then come back. But I thought that that also speaks to the power of the image. And photography is meant to communicate. And so in terms of what it communicates, I think it's very successful. I also think that fires can be challenging to photograph. And in my opinion, the photographer did a good job with this. There are a few blown areas, all of the white, not all of the white, but much of the white walkway or something in the back, and a little bit of the flames are blown. And again, the dirt in the front there looked like it was over sharpened. There was some artifact in it, and so I don't know what that was from. Anyway, that's what I have to say about that, about that image.
Thank you, Janice. The artist is Bill Hoffman. And next is Bouldery Cascade on the South Yuba.
The maker's given us an amazing study of power of water. The slow shutter speed has smoothed the water to make it otherworldly. The boulders bring us back to reality. I think the image might have been stronger if the photographer had given us a foreground element. Still, I really love the green hues in this image.
And the artist is Eric Ingalls. Next is Reflections on Golden Pond.
So I just love this image, and I'm assuming it's in Marysville by the silos. I think the effect of the reflections on the water is really interesting and unexpected, as is the placement of the birds near the top of the frame. So I thought that this image was about the horizontal and vertical lines, and it was a wise choice by the photographer to not have the horizontal lines of the birds bisect the verticals of the silos in the middle of the frame, and having the two horizontal lines at the top of the frame where the vertical lines are less prominent makes this image work well. There's beautiful light on the birds, and I thought that the photographer did a really good job with the exposure and the subtle tones. It would have been easy to blow out the white birds, and the photographer was able to keep beautiful morning color on the birds without blowing them out.
The artist is Eleni Prusa. Next is Color in Ireland.
The photographer's given us an image of rhododendrons in bloom, sheep and emerald green grass. Good focus, depth of field, and exposure. I recommend the maker consider cropping around the big boulder and see if that is more pleasing.
And the artist is Lori Woodhull. Next is Sunset is Amazing.
This is a really pretty sunset image with nice water reflections. Actually, on my monitor, the blues at home, the blues were more intense. So I noticed that. I love the pinks and the oranges at the horizons, and those blue tones that were in on my monitor. So my only criticism of this image is the foreground there, which is dirt, trampled dirt. And I don't think it adds anything to the sunset. And I'm wondering if the photographer moved to the right or to the left where there was the grass, if that would have helped this a lot. So, but beautiful sunset.
Artist is Jonathan Beth. And then we have Red Square Moscow 2.
Good exposure, well focused. Such a beautiful building. I find the lighting and hard shadows distracting. In a do-over, there may be a better light during the daytime. Still, this is some amazing architecture.
The artist is Bernadette Sylvester. And finally, our phone category, we have 3 entries here. First is Through the Eye of the Beholder.
So I like this interesting point of view, good for the photographer for thinking about that. I found myself peering into the lens to see, what was in there. And I was like looking like, what are they looking at? So I think that one of the things that I noticed, I was very interested in what was going on in the lens, but I found the background really distracting. And on the right, the lens, which is the subject, merges into the dark area of the background. So I don't know if you just move this person to some place that has a simpler background. And then yeah, that would be my only suggestion with that. I thought this was a fun photograph.
And the artist is Ray Mershing. And we want treats.
Well, look at those teeth. We get the story from the title. I'd like to see more space around the dogs. Color focus was very good. It was a fun shot.
And the artist is Mike Shea. And then we have Coastal Trail to Unstruther, Scotland.
So I thought this was a really well thought out composition with the two diagonal lines from each corner of the foreground leading the viewer into the trees, which then led me into the background. I believe this for Oriental poppies, and these don't disappoint. It's difficult to photograph red flowers, and the photographer did a good job with maintaining the detail in these. I like that the photographer included just a few on the lower right, because I think if there was as many on the lower right as here, that could have been a little bit overpowering. And then that the photographer's point of view was low enough that these trees kind of broke up some of that marsh or whatever that is, the lowland, and the trees added a nice element. Another element that makes this image successful is the repetition of the greens, blues, and reds. The red poppies and the red roofs of the buildings stand out more. And then I also appreciate the texture that the photographer has in the sky that provides visual interest at the top of the frame. So beautiful image.
And the artist is Craig Orson. And that was the end. And I want to thank our critiquers from the beginning. We have really good information, so we have a lot to go through. So thank you.
Well, thank you for hanging in there, and again, thanks for critiquers. And we will get these technical problems solved, I hope. And more, see you next month.